Primary memory is the memory the CPU can access directly. That phrase, directly, is the whole definition, and it is what separates this from everything in the next lesson. The processor fetches its instructions from primary memory across the buses we covered in topic 3.1. It cannot fetch anything from a hard disk or an SSD. Data there has to be copied into primary memory first before the CPU can touch it. There are two kinds. RAM, random access memory, is volatile. Its contents are lost the moment power is removed. It is the computer's working space, holding the operating system, the applications you have open, and the data they are working on. ROM, read-only memory, is non-volatile. It keeps its contents with no power at all. It holds the instructions the machine needs before any software has loaded, which is a genuine chicken and egg problem. Something has to tell the computer how to start loading things, and that something cannot itself be loaded. Now, RAM comes in two types, and rather than memorizing a table of differences, I want to give you the one physical fact that produces all of them. DRAM, dynamic RAM, stores each bit using a capacitor and a single transistor. A capacitor is essentially a tiny bucket holding an electrical charge, and it leaks. Within milliseconds, the charge drains away and the bit is lost. So DRAM must be constantly refreshed. Circuitry reads every cell and writes it back thousands of times a second, purely to stop it forgetting. SRAM, static RAM, stores each bit in a flip-flop made of several transistors, typically 6, and a flip-flop holds its state indefinitely as long as power is applied. Nothing leaks, so nothing needs refreshing. That is the single difference. Everything else in the table falls out of it. Watch how SRAM is faster because DRAM has to pause for refresh cycles, and a leaking capacitor takes time to sense. SRAM uses less power because DRAM burns energy continuously doing that refreshing. But DRAM is cheaper and denser because one capacitor and one transistor take far less silicon than 6 transistors. So for the same physical area, you get several times more DRAM than SRAM. And that trade-off decides where each is used. Main memory needs to be large and affordable, and a few nanoseconds of latency is acceptable, so it is DRAM. The RAM sticks in a computer are dynamic RAM. Cache needs to be as fast as physically possible and is only a few megabytes, so its cost per bit matters much less. Cache is SRAM. That is the answer to a question students often find odd. Why is cache not just more RAM? Because it is made of something different and something faster and more expensive. Both, though, are volatile. Refreshing is about a leaking capacitor, not about permanence, and neither type survives the power going off. ROM has types too, and they form a ladder where each step can be rewritten more easily than the one before. Plain ROM is written when the chip is manufactured and can never be changed. PROM, programmable ROM, arrives blank and can be written once by the purchaser using a special device. After that single write, it behaves exactly like ROM. EPROM, erasable programmable ROM, can be erased and rewritten many times, but the erasing is done by shining ultraviolet light through a small window in the chip's case. That has two consequences. The entire chip is wiped at once. You cannot change part of it, and the chip has to be physically removed from the circuit to do it. And EPROM, electrically erasable programmable ROM, is erased and rewritten by electrical signals in place without removing anything, and selected bytes can be changed rather than the whole chip. The pair examiner's test is EPROM against EPROM because the names differ by a single letter and are easy to confuse under pressure. The extra E stands for electrically, and that is the entire distinction. EPROM, ultraviolet light, whole chip, remove it from the machine. EPROM, electrical signals, selected bytes, chip stays where it is, and that difference has a consequence you have benefited from. EPROM is what a modern computer uses to hold its BIOS, which is precisely why a firmware update is something you can download and run rather than something requiring a screwdriver, a UV lamp, and 20 minutes. If the BIOS were held in EEPROM, updating it would mean opening the case and pulling the chip out. Now a distinction that costs marks constantly. Memory and storage are not interchangeable words. Primary memory has direct CPU access. The processor fetches instructions straight from it. Secondary storage does not. Its data must be copied into memory before the CPU can use it. Primary memory is volatile, secondary storage is non-volatile. Primary memory is lower capacity, typically 8 to 32 gigabytes, where secondary storage runs to hundreds of gigabytes or terabytes. And primary memory is very fast, where secondary storage is comparatively slow. Notice that this is the same pattern we saw with registers, cache, and RAM in topic 3.1, extended one step further out. Every step away from the processor gets bigger, cheaper per byte, and slower. Registers, then cache, then RAM, then the hard disk. It is one continuous hierarchy, not two unrelated lists. Which answers the question of why a computer needs both, and it is worth being able to argue rather than assert. Why not run everything from the hard disk and skip RAM? Because the CPU is astonishingly fast, and if it had to wait for a mechanical drive or even an SSD for every instruction, it would spend virtually all of its time idle. RAM is the high-speed buffer that keeps the processor supplied at the rate it can actually consume. And why not keep everything in RAM and skip the disk? Because RAM is volatile. Switch the machine off and it is all gone. Secondary storage provides permanence, and it provides capacity cheaply enough to hold everything you are not currently using. So RAM gives you speed and direct access, storage gives you non-volatile capacity. Neither can do the other's job. 4 things to take into the exam. First, RAM is volatile and ROM is non-volatile, the single most repeated 1-mark question in this section. Second, DRAM must be constantly refreshed and SRAM does not. SRAM is faster and more expensive, which is why cache is SRAM and main memory is DRAM. Say which is used where, because that is usually the second mark. Third, the difference between EEPROM and EEPROM is ultraviolet light versus electrical erasing, and whether the chip has to be removed. And fourth, never use memory and storage as synonyms. If you mean the hard disk, write secondary storage. If you mean RAM, write primary memory. Examiners cannot award a mark for the right idea expressed with the wrong term, because the term is what is being tested.